Hi, my name is Laria Freeman. I'm a correspondent for NowThis, and today I am joined with lots of authors and stewards of literature to have a really important conversation about banned books during Banned Books Week, which is October 1st through the 7th. This video is in partnership with bookshop.org. Today I'm joined by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Dr. Kendi has lots of banned books, very popular or unpopular, however you would like to observe it. Stamped from the beginning, how to be an anti-racist baby, etc. Are books that are amazing titles, but also are being threatened in this moment. I'm also joined by Mira Jacob, author of Good Talk, a memoir in conversation, Bryn Rebel Henry, author of Orpheus Girl, and George M. Johnson, author of All Boys Aren't Blue. I'm also joined by Daniel Jordan. Daniel Jordan co-owns Pearls Books in Fayetteville, Arkansas with his wife, Leah. Very happy to have you, Daniel. And I kind of want to just jump into our conversation. I'm wondering for the authors that we have on the line, uh, starting with Dr. Kendi, what was the year that your first book was challenged? And what were your feelings around finding out that your book was being banned in some parts of our country?
Well, first, let me just state that I'm glad to be in community with these authors who, we've all been facing this the challenge of the work that we just poured ourselves into being sort of snatched out of the hands of young people and older people. And but to your question, I think for me, it was I believe in I believe I had books banned before this, but it really affected me in 2020 when I wrote. I worked with Jason Reynolds on a book called Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism in You, which was a YA version of my adult book Stamped in the Beginning. And it was a book that really sought to chronicle the history of anti-Black racist ideas for young people like me who grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me because of the color of my skin, or other people who didn't look like me who thought that there was something wrong with me. And so to get young people to start thinking about the origins of those ideas and the wrongness of the ideas, I was just so proud of that book and so proud that so many people were reading the book. And so to learn in 2020 that it was among the most banned books, it was just really difficult for me. And especially working with Jason and I both didn't read much as young people, as when we were teenagers, because we both felt the books were just not that interesting. And so we made sure this book was, and to think that again, young people didn't have access to it. It just really devastated me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to say, I was joking with Dr. Kendi before we started recording that he's becoming a Now This regular. We're always happy to have him with us, and that I have a copy of one of his more recent titles, the graphic novel of Stamped from the Beginning. And I just wanted to make sure I showed that because we are a fan, no matter what politicians or legislators might think. And if I can, I would also want to speak to George about All Boys Aren't Blue. This isn't a work of fiction. These are essays that you pull together. So to not only have your work banned, as an LGBTQIA plus advocate, does it also feel as if you're being banned, if your presence is being banned in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think my presence is being attacked in this country. I don't really think they're attacking my work or my words because they didn't actually read the book. And I always say, and everybody's like, well, how do you know they didn't read the book? And I'm like, because what I said about Thomas Jefferson in chapter 5 comes way before the part that they're trying to ban the book for. So they would have been way more upset if they actually read the book and see what I say about the forefathers in chapter 5. So that's how I know this is not a full attack on like my actual story because they don't know my story. They just pulled 3 paragraphs from page 268, 270, and 272, and then ran with it across the country. But I think when I look at the book bans, I don't look at it as like a siloed issue. It is part and parcel of a much larger issue. It is part of the Don't Say Gay bill. It is tied to Roe v. Wade. It is tied to the fact that Gen Z is now officially more non-white than white per per the last census. All of those things are like working in tandem together and that is why we are seeing this backlash, so to speak, of where they are trying to remove as many people's rights who are non-white as possible. When you just kind of look at where we are as a country, I think that they thought they had more time before the was it minority majority principle happened. I think everybody thought by 2050 was when there would be more minorities in the country than there would be white people in the country. I think they're looking at the numbers and realizing that their grip on power, or that they don't have as much time as they thought they may have had to retain their power. And so I think that's why we are seeing like this warped up action happening across the country. And the reason that they're trying to remove books is because the books are starting to mirror the actual classrooms. And so when I grew up and I had to read that the worst book I ever read was Catcher in the Rye, and I will continue to yell that from the rooftops. That I was forced to try and find empathy for this kid. It was not going to happen. The kids now get to read me, and they get to read, Toni Morrison, and they get to read Nick Stone and Tiffany Jackson, and like so many books that where the characters look like them, the experiences look like them, but then their counterparts get to read about the experiences of others. What happens is then when that generation becomes the next generation in power, they actually, as senators, as leaders, will do effective change because they actually know the stories of other people who existed with them. And so when you remove those texts from the classroom and you put those white texts back in the classroom, we become an assimilist nation again, where I thought I had to try to assimilate to the white kids and the white stories that I read if I was going to find progress or change even within my own community. And so that's really what this is a fight about. It's more of the protection of an ideology. Again, they don't read our books, so they actually don't know what's in these books. But what they do know is that these books have the truth. And I think as a country that has solely survived on not telling the truth, removing these particular texts is the only way that they know that they won't survive if they don't remove the text, because this next generation is a generation that is very active and very ready to burn it all down.
Yes, absolutely. And you make a great point about kind of the minority majority shift. And I fully believe that people who are determined to misunderstand you are never going to be trying to read your books or trying to get at the heart of what you're trying to communicate in those works. They have different agendas. Bryn, can you talk to us a little bit about when Orpheus Girl was banned and how you felt and your thoughts in that moment, seeing your book being pulled from the shelves, being pulled from the young people that you were trying to reach?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said was so beautiful, George, where you talked about, this attempt at kind of reinstating the structure of this country, which was founded on great violence. And I think, I don't know, I think, when you do this work, and I also just say it's an honor to be here with all of you today. When you do this work, you're trying to speak to your community and speak to the stories that you didn't have when you were growing up, right? But you're also trying to an extent, to create the ability for empathy or understanding. So, people within your community can read your work and they share it with their friends or their parent or the people in their life who, they're attempting to share or see themselves with. And I think this challenge of these books is to prevent that, to try to reinstill this violent structure within the country and to ensure that it's being instilled within the youth of the country as well, and in reaction to the stance and positioning of, this generation. And so when I saw, the book was banned, it was challenged. It seemed immediately just to be an act of censorship and one that fit into all of these other efforts, the Don't Say Gay bill, the variety of things being kept out of the classroom, the treatment of queer kids in school. And so it was profoundly frustrating and concerning for, the young people of this generation. But I also think in a way it sort of symbolizes the profound change happening in our country right now and happening in this younger generation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mira, when we talk about Good Talk, a memoir in conversation, when you saw that collection, that memoir was being banned and that it was being pulled from shelves. We're talking a lot about the people that are challenging these works, the people that are banning these works. They aren't even reading them. They're picking up on buzzwords. They're picking up on topics that scare them, topics that represent a part of the country that they would rather ignore, that they would rather push to the side. What were your feelings when you saw this piece that you've worked so hard on being almost rejected in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question because it gets to the heart, I think, of also what Ibram and George and Bryn are all saying, which is there is nobody easier to manipulate than people who don't know what they don't know. And the easiest way to make sure that happens is to keep a world of knowledge at bay from them, a world of what they might relate to, a world of what they might know better about. When I found out Good Talk was banned, I will say I don't know why I was surprised. I was, but I was brokenhearted just because I wrote that book specifically about how the white half of our family had gone down a very sort of terrifying fascist road while also saying they loved me and my son. And I wanted to speak directly to that part of America, the part of America that will both say it loves you and be racist towards you and deny you freedoms and put your body in peril. And when I was writing that book, I kept thinking, if I can write this book, I make a little more space for us. I make a little bridge for us to stand on, to be able to breathe here and say, we live here. There are others like us. Find us. There's a way through this. And what it felt to me was like someone was trying to kick out that bridge, as I feel the same way with Ibram's work and Bryn's work and George's work being taken. Those are my bridges to other people's experiences. Those are experiences I may or may not know about, but when I read those books, I understood what I didn't know, and I could take a step toward it instead of just reacting with fear. And I hate those bridges being kicked away.
Absolutely. Those bridges are so important. And that kind of brings me to the work that Daniel Jordan's doing in protecting those bridges that authors are making with their audiences around this country. George and his wife at Pearl's Books are really fighting the good fight against banned books. And specifically, they're fighting Act 372 in Arkansas. George, can you tell us a little bit more about Act 372 and how you and your wife got involved in this work? Not George, sorry, Daniel. Can you tell me more about how you got involved in this work?
Sure. Yeah. So we Act 372. What it does is it criminalizes making harmful materials available to minors. And harmful materials is very vague and not defined clearly in the bill. And it treats minors the same, whether you're 3 years old or 17 years old. So there's a lot of problems with the law itself. It's vague. It prevents access to books that are constitutionally protected. But we joined because another bookstore invited us, Wordsworth Books in Little Rock, Arkansas. And when we initially joined, we really kind of thought of the bill more as a library bill against libraries and preventing libraries being able to provide access to these books. But the more we read it and the more we looked into it, we realized it affected us as well. And yeah, I mean, we're really hoping to protect the availability of books to all people. And it's kind of scary what the law, if it goes into effect, what it could mean for not just our business, but also our local libraries and the state of books in general. So we're fortunate right now that we have a preliminary injunction until the suit is fully heard, which we're still waiting on a date for that. But yeah, I come at it from a little bit of a different lens from the authors here, which I'm in awe of all of you. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. Because it's not my personal work that's being taken from the shelves. It's work that we feel a responsibility to provide to our community. We have all of your books in our store. So, it is a little bit less personal from that lens, but, I also have two kids, and I want them to grow up and know that they have the access that they deserve, to books of all kinds from all different walks of life. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like Daniel brings up a great point that a lot of these laws, a lot of these acts that are aiming to become laws are so vague. The language is dangerously vague that teachers are being fired, teachers are scared of being fired, parents are concerned, librarians are concerned and worry about their jobs, booksellers are worried about their jobs. How have each of you, if you have personally tried to fight the bans and the challenges against your books, fighting against this language that's being weaponized against your works? George? Oh, I think you're muted.
All right, I got it. I caught it. I caught it. Yeah, I mean, I sent my mother and my aunts to a school board meeting. So I wrote a statement, and my mother and my aunts went and read it in Glen Ridge, New Jersey, which was like 20 minutes from where I grew up. And we were able to keep my book on the shelf that way. I've signed petitions. I've worked behind the scenes with a lot of librarians, giving them some tools, especially school teachers, giving them some tools and some tactics to use for their library resource centers. Again, these people banning books are not that smart, so there are ways to get around it. And so we have like a secret system of ways that I've created to get around it that has been helping with many of the teachers in the resource centers in the classrooms. But I'm also part of a federal lawsuit in Florida that's fighting against the bans that are happening down there, which we got some pretty good news about the other day. So, we're trying to fight it from all angles. I also think the most important thing that we do is that we put the correct information out there. So anytime someone says something or creates a narrative that's false, I usually use TikTok, social media to kind of go out there and not be afraid of the words that I put in the book. I think a lot of people are afraid because, I did put some explicit things in my book because it's a memoir and it was the truth. So when they read these explicit things, I think they think that I'm going to cringe, or that I'm going to not respond using those words and explaining why I use those words. So for us, it's about not being afraid of saying yes, I did say that, and here's the context. A lot of times that has worked. I've been able to change some of the people's minds. That's never my goal. Ultimately, my goal is always to make sure that my work is being put out there in a correct light. But if it ultimately does do that work to get a person to actually pick up the book to read it, rather than just reading the paragraphs that they take out of it, and then assume that the whole book should be judged because of these 3 paragraphs, then I've done my job. I think the biggest thing for us, or for me, is that I just continue to try and stand up against it and continue to talk out against it, because the teens are watching. And so if they see that I am not faltering in this fight, and that I, don't cower in the face of cowardice, it literally inspires them to keep going. They DM me. I've seen many of them start their own banned book clubs. They email me about getting free books. My team always sends them books for their banned book clubs. Whatever it is that I can do, anytime I'm asked to be a part of a campaign, I do it. I've even started a banned book apparel line, so that people who are like, well, what can we do? I'm like, sometimes it just means wearing a sweatshirt that says I read banned books, because it challenges people, because you don't know who is trying to ban books. So if you're walking around saying that you read banned books, it lets them know that there are more of us than there are of them. Especially when you now realize that 60% of the bans stem back to 11 people. They're not as large. They just have the loudest mouths, and they have the larger platforms. And so it's on us to just continue to use our platforms to kind of fight back against it. And so that's what I do.
Absolutely. Come on, banned book apparel. I love that. Give me a t-shirt.
I will make sure we get you one.
But you're so right. They thrive in this lack of context. Because when you throw around these buzzwords, when you fear monger against people who just honestly are not always to their own credit, just ignorant of this literature and why it's being banned and what's actually being attacked within the pages. People like Ron DeSantis in Florida really thrive on the miseducation of his constituency, and hoping that they aren't going to look too deeply into the things that he's trying to ban and restrict them from. Mira, can you talk a little bit about how you're fighting to keep your work on the shelves and how you're defending that work?
Yeah, I think there are two ways. And George, I love everything that you just said. It filled me with joy to hear all the ways in which you are thinking around this. There are two main ways that I'm doing work. One is through larger institutions. I'm on the council of the Authors Guild. I think through how these systems are working and how we can move as authors against them, how we can come together. Same thing with the work with Penn. Those are larger institutional places that I can find and collectivize power. The thing that I think is also really important is what George was talking about, which is not taking on the shame that is trying to be burdened on me when they say my book is banned, when they say this book should not be read by children, specifically stepping out of that and into my own power, whether that's on social media or it's when I'm going to represent myself in schools, just ways of saying, I am this thing that someone is telling you to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. Here is my experience, and here are all the reasons that you can understand where I'm coming from and we can communicate. And just, I know that sounds so simple, but I feel like that's the thing that they're capitalizing on so often. It's especially scaring kids away from this thing that we all know, which is the reason that we all are in marginalized communities. You are made to feel afraid if you step out of line. So just saying in a very kind of flat way, I am out of line according to this. I exist. You also can exist in this space with me, and standing in that place, which was what George was talking about, I found that is incredibly effective.
Yeah, there's so much room for all of us in all of our stories. And I love that, really humanizing that, like, they're not just banning books and banning ideas, they're trying to ban people, they're trying to ban experiences. And that's what we're really fighting against. Bren, when we talk about Orpheus Girl, how are you defending this love story that you're trying to present to young people that's kind of being boiled down to buzzwords for politicians to kind of scare their constituency?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Well, first, thank you for your answers. Those are so beautiful and so inspiring. And I guess my answer is in two parts. So one, I think it's incredibly important to start deprogramming the narrative and the buzzwords that are being assigned. And also to point out, when this narrative is being assigned, in my case, to Orpheus Girl, the difference between fear and fear-mongering and fragility, and the attempt to refuse any kind of discomfort that comes with learning or acknowledging, the experience of others. And so I would say, for me, it started with pointing that out. And the second point is that I think one of the things that's been the most difficult and that I've found, I think, really insidious about all these bans and legislations is that it's almost impossible to qualitatively see in what ways the bans are affecting your books, where they might be banned, where, there's restricted access. And so you can't really respond to or track it, and which makes it so, I think, profoundly confusing for authors and publishers to kind of have a really comprehensive idea of where their books are being targeted or removed and to respond to it. And I think one of the sort of ways that we could begin to do that and begin to, speak about it, I would recommend to readers in your local communities to, contact local libraries or school libraries and ask if they, carry books in the banned book list. And if they don't carry them or they can't stock them, ask why. And I also would say that the ABA Right to Read toolkit, which is mostly for booksellers, for readers, can be really important and helpful as well to think about how to interact with this way, and to also support, local bookstore owners, such as Daniel, and who are working to create narratives and to keep these books in the hands of young people who may need them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great advice. Dr. Kendi, as I started this conversation saying, you have several books that are being challenged and banned across this country. And you write very prolifically about racist and the history, racism and their history of racist ideas in this country, really challenging people to take a look at where we've come from and how we can adjust to that and move forward in the future. How do you fight against these challenges? How do you continue to defend that stories that you're trying to tell?
I think I I told myself quite early on in this sort of latest iteration of book banning that so every time they banned one of my books, I was going to come out with a new one, and so that's really what I've been trying to do. It's been another push to sort of get myself to the writing table, and when I don't feel like writing, I think about um, this sort of larger current. Um, I'm inspired by authors who are new authors who are coming out with books, in this environment. I'm inspired by other authors who are defending their books, and and all of that inspires me to just write and to produce more books. Um, and I think more than anything else, that's what I've tried to do. And so, of course, I probably um, have pushed myself to the limit, but in many ways, we've had to push ourselves to the limit to defend our books and to push our books. So, um, and I just think that part of the reason why they're banning our books is because we are living in an incredible time for literature. And I mean, the books that this collection of authors have written, I think is a testament, to that. And I mean, no matter the child, no matter the older person, chances are somebody is writing about their unique experience, what their identity, what they're facing. And there's never been a time in U.S. history where that was the case. And so I try to remember that. I try to remember that, and again, that inspires me to continue that trajectory of literature, of anti-racist, multicultural sort of literature that we're all creating in this moment.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the continued tenacity and vulnerability there. Now, for each of you, I think I'm going to start with Daniel, but I was wondering if each of you could offer us a banned book that you believe is a must read. It doesn't have to be one of your titles, but it could be one of your titles. That's totally fine. But Daniel, what is your favorite banned book that you feel like everybody has to read?
I'm gonna say Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. It's a beautiful book. It's a graphic memoir. So Maya tells the story of their life, and it was a really good way for me to kind of really put myself in the shoes of a trans person and experience the world from their perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons we're all here, right? Fighting these banned books, and so that's my go-to recommendation.
Yeah, and I think Genderqueer has been, if I did my research properly, it's been the most banned book this year.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy. Mira, what is your banned book that you would like to recommend?
I'm going to go back to the book that Ibram was talking about, which is Stamped from the Beginning. Both the graphic version and the just written text version have been, I'm a big fan of a graphic book, so I love the way that that was laid out. I love the way that it was conceived. I think it was really smartly done. The pacing is phenomenal. Also, I'll just say that it was one of the first books that my son really understood as a middle grade reader. Ibram's sense of history and understanding Jason's poetic voice kind of brought together in this really beautiful way. And I feel like what it did was it allowed him to understand so much of this country that he has inherited and the complications in it that he could sense without understanding the why. It gave him so much of a why, and it helped him navigate himself as a young brown man growing up, you know, in this sort of spectrum that of a country that's very polarized along white and black. It helped him understand how to move his own body through this world and with what history he was moving through. So I found it incredibly wonderful.
Very, very nice. Bryn, what is your banned book?
I would actually say, for me, I think the banned book that everyone should read, that I think we should read every one of this panel's books, is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And I say this because of the examination of the forms of violence, erasure, and diminishment that are sort of just built throughout this country and society, and in this case, through the experience of a young Black girl. And I think for readers to kind of look at this work and to understand the historic sort of ways that writers have been writing about this erasure and violence and experience, and to, you know, kind of look at this sort of long-standing ways of resisting and speaking to that.
Absolutely. And if anyone's going to read Toni Morrison, I recommend you read her multiple times. She's kind of author that gets better every time you sit with the story, you learn something new, you find something new. It'll reveal itself to you the more that you read it. So love that recommendation. George, what is your banned book?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually going to say Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye as well. That's the book I carry with me on the airplane everywhere I go when I'm traveling, because I reread it often. So I'm like, well, it's already been said, but I still think maybe, I don't know, maybe we should say it twice. I think that book being the oldest book on the banned book list, it was number 8 last year. It was yes, 8 last year. Then it rose to number 3 this year. You know, the fact that that book has been out for so many decades and is still being banned in that way, I think it's a reminder of the fact of the work that Toni Morrison has done for all of us as authors and for all of us as creatives. And I also think it reminds me of the importance of how she had already fought this fight and gave us the tools. She has videos that are out there about censorship that everybody should be listening to as we're in this fight, because she really gave us all of the things that we need to continue in this fight. And so I also think, like, it's not a coincidence that all of our books have ended up on that list, because many of us have read her work. And so if you get it, you get it. And what she wanted us to do was to get it. And so we put our text out there because of her putting her text out there. And because it's so symbiotic, we're all on these lists together now with her, kind of like carrying her torch that she started, you know? And so, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're thinking about legislation like Act 372, if we're thinking about any of these book bans that have kind of come out around the country, I feel like we could say that it's racism, we can say that it's homophobia, we could say that it's xenophobia, and it is all of these things. But I want to talk more deeply about the fears and the kind of warped ideology that is driving the influx of bans around the US, especially in this moment. There are just so many right now, and that can't be overlooked, the sheer mass of them. Mira, could you talk a little bit about the moment that we're in right now with book bans in this country?
Yes, but wait, can I just really quickly, did we hear Dr. Kendi's banned book recommendation?
Oh, did I skip you? Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Can we just hear it? I'm just so curious. Sorry, can we
Yes,
go back a minute?
I'm so sorry.
Well, it's okay. Actually, Mira, I have 2. So if I could,
Yeah,
so
do both.
I'm constantly asked by people sort of how to talk to their family members, you know, about race. So I'm constantly recommending good talk, actually. And I think this is a never-ending challenge for you know, for people who really want to reach the people that they love, really want to get closer and to develop deeper relationships with the people they love. And I think Good Talk helps to facilitate that. So I'm constantly recommending that book. And, you know, in a book that I wish I would have read when I was 16 years old is All the Boys Aren't Blue. And it wasn't until graduate school that I um, really started to begin to understand what it means to be Black and queer. And I feel like I made so many mistakes, and almost actually, my best friend was Black and queer, and if I didn't sort of confront myself and my own sort of homophobia in graduate school, then I could have lost one of my best ever friends. And so, I reflect back of how many relationships, or even um, how many times I I just sort of really reflect back to the fact that I feel like I could have been a better human being, you know, if I would have read All Boys Aren't Blue, you know, as a 16-year-old. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so devastating. That's such a powerfully moving sort of book, that is unapologetic in its truth, which I think is what is attracting it to young people and us older people. You know, is being taken out of hands. And so, you know, George, thank you for your work.
Thank you so much for that. We love mutual fans in the group. I love that you all love each other and recommend each other's books. And I hope anyone watching this is making a list of all of these books, not only for themselves, but for their loved ones. Thank you,
Can I
Mira,
say
for that reminder.
one other quick thing?
Yes, yes.
And, you know, Bryn, I actually have Off Your Scroll ready for my daughter, who's 7 years old, who earlier this year, her and her friend, they had a wedding with each other, these two girls. And so I'm hoping maybe 2 more years, you know, she could read your book.
I love it.
Thank you. It's so lovely.
Now, Mira, if you could give us a little insight into this really unique moment that we're having in the country, because there have been book bannings are not new. Literature has always been attacked, books have always been banned, but there's something very different about what we're experiencing right now. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
There is something very different about what we're experiencing right now. And I think, you know, if you're reading it all right now, you are coming across both this idea of how much information is out there, how much disinformation is out there, and then this idea that you have books that are coming from people that have lived experience that are basically providing a really rich context for what a life can look like and the complications faced within it. The idea that you would take that out of the conversation in a moment that is so politically charged and is relying really on a kind of blind devotion to hatred as a power grab for a country. The idea that you would take a voice that someone might understand or relate to or feel compassion toward out of that conversation deliberately means that you are willing to divide your country to keep power. And I think that's exactly why these books are being banned. I think everything that everyone is speaking about before me in terms of where we are with the racial breakdown of the country, where we are with these larger ideas of identity, these things that have long needed to be at the forefront of our brains when we are talking about how to make policy, all of that is at stake. One very easy way to cripple it is to take us out of the conversation. And that's why the books are being banned. And that's why it feels, frankly, so horrifying to hear about it. When Dr. Kendi was speaking just now, he was talking about almost losing his best friend. And I had the thing where I told myself, don't cry on camera. But that was, it moves me so much to hear that, because I think this is what I worry most about, is how we are losing each other. And all the opportunities that they are making sure we have to lose each other, which includes getting rid of these books, right? It's such an easy way for us to lose each other. So I think that's what we're looking at now, the political climate that we're in, the need for us to stop trusting each other so that certain voices, certain interests can keep their power, the ways in which they're turning us against each other. That's what we're up against. That's why it matters so much right now.
Yeah. George, did you have something that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you could just tell this is not about book bans. Like what they're doing in this country right now is like it's dystopian almost. You know, I've been dealing with the book ban since September of 2021. I think my book was the first taken into a sheriff's office and filed with a criminal complaint. That was in Florida, in Flagler County, which has a very, very interesting history around Black folks just in general. So for that to be the county where a book was taken into a sheriff's office and an actual criminal complaint was filed, is very, very interesting. But when you look at that, right, it's like, that just shows you what this is, like the personal concierge service for white folks with 911, right? Like it's like, well, we can't beat you this way, so now we're gonna get sheriffs involved in books, right? The fact that the people who are banning our books are saying these books are harmful to children, and your Christmas card has your 8-year-old with an AK-47 saying Merry Christmas on it. So we know that it's we're living in two different universes at times when we're actually talking about the book bans. And so I love what Mira is saying, because it's like, this is something way deeper than a book ban. It's something way deeper than a Don't Say Gay bill. It's something way deeper. I can't even remember say it. I mean, you know that slavery had benefits. Like when you look at it, it's insidious. It really is speaking to. I often joke with my friends about like I'm always like, I wonder what period is Make America Great Again. Like when they say Make It Great Again, I'm like, I always wondered what year they were talking about.
When's the again?
And when like what year, like what time period are they referring to? I always felt originally it was like the 1950s, like before the Civil Rights Act, you know, where white folks were okay with women having a little bit of rights as long as they were white women. But then when they said slavery had benefits, I said, oh, they meant the 1850s. Like, oh, okay. Like now, you know, like, and I think that's what this is really about, right? It's like what the devil that we couldn't see for so long, and I'm gonna be clear, which existed on both sides of politics, is now fully out. They have taken the hoods are off again. You know, it's the Klan without the hoods. It's all of that, and that's really what this is. This is that scary dystopian world where it's like almost like they are so afraid of change because of, and it's really Gen Z. Like Gen Z is just very, very different. In getting to meet those kids, I sit in classrooms and they're like, my name is so-and-so, I'm pansexual, I'm da-da-da-da-da, my pronouns are E, er, M, and I'm sitting there like, I don't even know those pronouns, and I'm supposed to come in here and teach you, and y'all are teaching me things. They're already so forward-thinking because of technology, because of social media, because of connectivity, which also speaks to Mira's thing. They're connected. And see, the older generation never was connected. They don't understand what that connection looks like. And so when you watch a new generation be that unified, we are watching the other generation trying to figure out what is every way we can destroy them. Well, 20% of them are LGBTQ. We got to make all these anti-LGBTQ laws. These kids, for some reason, love trans kids and they love LGBTQ people. We got to make sure that we eradicate any ways for them to love them. These kids love Black kids too. We got to take away Black history. That's really what it's about. It is really just trying to destroy. We're not going to make gun change because you know what? We do want y'all to be fearful in schools. We do want y'all to be scared in these classrooms. We don't want y'all to have protections. That's really what this is about. It really is this fear of that new generation and how powerful they are about to be because they want the books, they want the knowledge. And so that's where we're really at. And that's, I think, what all of us are on here fighting for and why we write to them, because we know what we can't get done now, they can get done if they just have the tools to do it.
100%. Yeah, Mira made a great point about how books are really how we connect with each other. And you're absolutely right, George, that they're breaking down these connections. They're trying to separate people. I can think of lots of things in Florida that I would take to a sheriff's office and be like, fix this. And like a book is not one of them. So it's just really disheartening to see this. It's not about books, it's about power. And you're 1000% correct about that. Dr. Kendi, when we're talking about this, how it's not about books, it's about this fear, about this power, that legislators, that politicians, that bigots are trying to grab in this country. How do we then still encourage people as a society to kind of see through this, to look around all of this and still keep reading and sharing and amplifying banned books and the messages that they carry?
Going back to something that George stated about this seeming as if we're in the 1850s, to extend that, the original book banners were enslavers. These were, I mean, in the enslaving South, beginning in the early 1830s, really by 1829, there was mass banning of any sort of anti-slavery literature. Everything from David Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, this radical pamphlet that called on enslaved people to rise up even violently to throw off the yoke of slavery, to in Uncle Tom's sort of cabin that in the end said Black people should go back to Africa. So it, and everything in between was banned. And then when you think of in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, that was the height of the abolitionist movement. And so part of what was happening is enslavers were trying to sort of hold back the tide of resistance to slavery, a tide that built year after year, decade after decade, until we were able to abolish chattel slavery. And so to your point of how do we ensure that people continue to push and look around, I think for people to understand that they're trying to hold back the tide, that they're trying to hold back, the tide that's going to create an equitable and just world for us all. And if we keep pushing, then we'll be able to abolish racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia. We'll be able to build, an equitable world, because that's what the young people want. And so we either got to help them or get out of their way.
Absolutely. Daniel, if we're looking at Act 372 in Arkansas, and we're thinking about what the people who are driving these book bans forward say they care about, they say they care about the Constitution, they say they care about the soul of this country. Talk to me about why Act 372 is unconstitutional on its head.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and like everyone's saying, that it's not about books. It's about limiting perspectives that people are able to read from and able to learn from and connect with other folks. So it's unconstitutional on its face because it limits free speech. It limits access to materials that are constitutionally protected. So, yeah, I mean, the fact too that it takes the choice out of families' hands, for us to be able to choose for our own children what they have access to or what they want to read. It puts it in the hands of the government, which I don't feel comfortable with. Not with our current governor, especially. But so, yeah, I mean, there's several different levels to why it's not legal. But essentially, it's limiting speech and it's limiting access. So that's it's as unconstitutional as it gets.
Absolutely. And what are your hopes as you see the lawsuit that you and your wife are trying to help get off the ground? What are your hopes for what that can do?
Yeah, well, we're hoping to protect our libraries and our librarians. I think someone on this call mentioned that librarians are fearful, teachers are fearful, booksellers are fearful, and that's true. But yeah, so it's to protect our libraries. protect the institutions that they are, for the community, and to prevent overreaching government, and to continue to be able to provide books for our community here in Fayetteville, that we're a part of, and that we've kind of helped cultivate. So yeah, it's basically to keep the access to books that are protected by the Constitution.
Thank you for that work. I feel like during this conversation, I was going to ask, do we believe that politicians have exacerbated the book bans movement? And the answer is yes, duh. But Bryn, I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit about what young people can do about that, because politicians are clearly using book bans. They're stepping into their schools, telling them what they can and can't learn about. Um, how can young people observe this moment? How can they take their power back? Um, yeah.
I think there are several ways to do this. And I also think that the question of power being taken goes back to what everyone has said in their answers. When in 2022, Orpheus Grow was first on one of the lists of challenged books by the conservative lawmaker Matt Cross, I was actually living in Ljubljana, in a country in Slovenia, in former Yugoslavia. And, famously in the 60s, when the regime was starting to collapse, young writers who were seen as being radical and politically dangerous to the government for the representation of their work and the stories they were telling, were being jailed and exiled to attempt to, control the movement of the young people in this country who had ideas and to maintain fear and power. And I think the most profoundly important thing that you can do is to know that just historically, systemically, this is always what a violent system and a violent regime does to maintain the ability to uphold their violence, right? It is not a reflection of the worth of your identity or your story or your place in the world. And I would also say, I think one of the best things you can do is to try to get engaged in local communities, to try to read the work that's being challenged, to, try to, in a time where a lot of librarians and teachers are afraid and there's this fear mongering, try to question or talk about that fear with your peers, try to find ways to get involved or support, reading in your libraries, in your bookstores, in the ways that you can. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. George, you spoke a little bit earlier about asking people who support your book, who support banned books, to wear your gear, to go out to student teacher board meetings, to kind of speak up in their communities. And I feel like when I come into conversations about how can young people speak up, how can they be heard, we always end up on voting. And people should vote. Like, I never want to be like, give up on voting, but I can also understand how people get discouraged. Our political system, it takes a long time. People are being harmed right now. We're seeing people removing books, removing curriculum from their classrooms right now. So it's more of like a yes and. In addition to voting, how else do you recommend that young people kind of step up and make their voices heard? Let politicians know that, like, you're not protecting me. I want these things.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But it's interesting that that question is being asked on a day like today when Dianne Feinstein passes away, right? Because that's the problem, right? She just was working yesterday at 90 years old, and they continue to like wheel her into work. But what they never do, and this is just across the board, what they never do is they never pass the torch. They never trust the youth with the next step. So while a lot of these politicians and stuff are worried about their legacy, they're never worried about their protege. They're never worried about that next person after them that has to come into power. They're never building up people. They're hoping that I've inspired someone enough to want to be like me, instead of actually going out there and making sure that there is someone like them that can come in and fill that seat whenever it is time for them to go on, right? And so so I understand the youth frustration, because I would be frustrated too if I kept watching people who were born 6 and 7 and 8 decades before me make the decisions that impact my life today that look nothing like the world that they inherited. And so I'm always encouraging them, as you said, yes, voting is important, but there are other ways too. Mutual aid, building systems ourselves, which many of them do, but I'm always encouraging them, like, if the government isn't going to do it, then sometimes we got to do it ourselves. What does it look like when you come together as a coalition and you build the thing that you want to see in your communities? I'm also encouraging them to step up and be local politicians, run for those local offices. We are watching the youth start to actually now understand local politics are just as important as being the president of the United States. And hell, we could be honest, local politics are more important than being the president of the United States, because part of the reason we're in this situation is because of school boards. Who would have ever thought that, right? Everybody's like, I want to be a senator, I want to be a governor. It's like, no, somebody needs to be an alderwoman or alderman, because look at New York City's flooding right now, right? Like, so it's like also encouraging them to understand the politics of where they live are just as important as the greater scheme of politics that they see on MSNBC every day, and encouraging them to take those type of positions too. And I think the last thing is, helping them to activate their voices, amplifying their voices. I think what Ibram said was important, like, to get out the way. Like, sometimes it's on us. It's almost like, I hate putting the burden on the oppressed, and it's like the kids are who are oppressed. So, and then we're like, well, what can they do to, it's like, no, what the hell do we need to do to make sure they have the power? And I think that's where the reframing has to start to come in too, because it's like, I don't want to see an 11-year-old at a protest saying Black Lives Matter. I don't. I want them to be able to go outside and play kickball. I don't want to have to watch 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds holding their fists in the air, marching down the damn street when they should be watching Sesame Street. Like, that pisses me off to no end, that we have to put our kids through activism class or activism while other kids don't have to go through that, right? So it's like, what can we do now as the adults in the room to make sure that they, one, get to actually have childhoods, because like that is really being stolen from them in this moment, and two, enable them to have the power to know how these systems work and how they can get interacted in these systems, but also create systems outside of these systems to get the work done as well.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mira, I see that you agree with a lot of that. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Sorry, I can't stop my head from nodding with all the agreeing that I'm doing. I've been trying. I've been like, stop nodding your head. But absolutely. And I think when George is saying that, one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot, my generation is Gen X, which I sort of think of as like the quiet, forgotten generation. We're usually left all of the surveys that anyone does about how does your generation feel. They're like, who knows with those people. But I think that speaks to this idea that we came up in a time where we saw what people were calling political correctness. We saw this sort of understanding of this sort of larger understanding of who we are and how systems are working. And then we also saw the way that that was used against us just a few years later to make it into an embarrassing idea that you'd gone down with political correctness. You had kind of taken these steps for a kind of freedom that was taken way too seriously, and you kind of took it out of control. There's a way in which any kind of movement toward power and any kind of actualization is later ridiculed so that you step away from your agency. And so the thing that I think about a lot, and this is to George's point, is how do we as adults help our children, our kids, the people that are coming up under us understand how long-ranging this fight is, how many ancestors and people they have with them, and how do we step away from our own shame and our own nervousness to help them harness the systems that they need to keep them going, which requires us to do learning. It requires us to stay brave. It requires us to constantly be in a learning curve with them. And that's what I always think, that's our best way forward.
Absolutely. I want to close out this conversation by asking Dr. Kendi, and this can be an open question for anyone else who also feels moved to, but when talking with all of you, I'm thinking about young people, young writers who want to tell their stories, who want to tell stories that are different than the mainstream, but they're seeing kind of ideas and stories like what they want to share being banned. how do we encourage them to continue to pick up that pen, pick up that laptop, tell your story anyway? How would you speak to those young people that want to get on the page?
Well, I would say first that we as authors, we're not only defending our books, we're defending that author who wants to write that book, who wants to present that story. And so when you look at us and you look at all we're doing, just remember that we're doing this for you. And hopefully that can give you some solace that there are many authors out here who are fighting so that you can sit at that writing table and create your story. And I would also encourage that writer to remember that chances are your story, in all of its uniqueness, in all of its complexity, in all of its originality, is dangerous. And to me, that's a good thing, because it's dangerous because it is a story that hasn't been told. And so the more we tell that story, the more you tell your story, the more people who have similar stories are able to see themselves, normalize themselves, um, and sort of, and I think it sort of better allows for them to then write their story, right? And so what's dangerous becomes normal, and that's the problem. Like, they have made us and our stories the problem, right? And I think the more we're able to convey them, and the more we're able to convey the solution, and the more that writer is able to share that, the better.
Well, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, Bryn Bearable Henry, Mira Jacob, Daniel Jordan, and George M. Johnson, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. All of your work, everyone, thank you so much for your vulnerability. And you know what Beyonce says, you must be that chick if you causing all this conversation. So we don't like banned books, but you must be doing something right if they're trying to keep you off the shelves. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of you for joining us. Once again, my name is Luria Freeman. I'm from NowThis. And this has been a conversation in partnership with bookshop.org for Banned Book Week, which is October 1st through 7th. Thank you so much for watching.